Welcome to the Waterfowl East podcast. We've got Kevin Cheff, also known as the Retriever Coach. Lots of people have seen some of his stuff online. Lots of people that I know are part of the Fetch program, and it seems to be a going concern, as we would say in this area. So welcome, Kevin.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to have you on. Looking forward to this conversation. It's retriever training season here in the Maritimes and in Canada. It's a short season, but we're happy to be in the middle of it. It's always a long winter. So you want to tell me a little bit more about yourself? I gave you just sort of a short introduction, but I know there's a lot more to you than that. So
yeah, sure. I'll jump in there. So I got my first retriever in 1996. I just wanted a pet, and lo and behold, it was a Labrador retriever. The breeder was into training retrievers, so it really sparked my interest. And in fact, it developed a passion, almost a sickness for training retrievers at that time. And I ended up training my dog for hunt tests and field trials. And well, 4 years later, I met up with a pro named Jamie Ballastant, who trained retrievers for field trials in Canada and the U.S. And he asked me if I wanted to come and be his assistant. So I quit my job working underground at a company called Inco in Sudbury, Ontario, and went to work for Jamie for a couple of years, learning the craft of dog training from him, and opened up my own business shortly after that, and trained retrievers until 2015. And then in 2015, I sort of changed course and went into teaching people how to train retrievers. And that's really been my passion for the last 10 years is sharing what I know about training retrievers with people all over the world, quite frankly. And started out as doing in-person workshops. And then in the last few years, it's been teaching people digitally online through a membership program that I have. And we have over 400 members in 6 countries around the world. And it's exciting, bringing a lot of joy to people who love to train their dogs, whether they're training them for hunting or they're training them for hunt tests or field trials. I love helping people understand the process and the philosophy and helping them get unstuck and guiding them through that journey of training retrievers.
that's awesome. Amazing, really, that once you went that digital route, you kind of got your feet wet in coaching people just locally and maybe at a distance too. And then as soon as you went digitally, it's amazing how connected we can be with and how many people across the world are training retrievers,
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's, I get messages from people literally around the world asking questions about training retrievers all over Europe, Northern Europe, Australia, New Zealand. It's really cool that there are people all over the world training retrievers.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a natural progression that you see in a lot of retriever trainers now. Like you see a lot of the guys, like, and some of the top pros or bigger names in the industry are, they still have a truckload of dogs, but the coaching aspect of it seems to be sort of a natural progression. And for you, I mean, you loved your job when you trained retrievers for people, but to actually go out and coach people, that's got to be pretty gratifying for you.
Yeah, I love training retrievers. I was passionate about it. But even while I was training retrievers, just, being out with my clients and they would ask questions, I was always happy to sort of elaborate on what my thought process was or why we were doing the things we were doing. And I could see the joy that it brought to people and just helping them understand retriever training. And it's been a bit of a journey. When I first started out coaching people, you do your best with what you know, and how, learning how people learn was part of the process as well over the last 10 years, is watching people put into practice the information I'm giving them and sort of seeing how they're reacting to it and making adjustments to make sure that people feel they're in a safe place to learn. And that there's room to make mistakes. Of course, that's important. And not overwhelming them with too much information, but you just really got to be observant and read the room and again, it's just trying to bring more joy to people. They love being out there with their dogs. They love developing that team and seeing their dog progress and learn and just really bond with their dog. And they don't want to struggle at it. They don't want to feel frustrated. They don't want to feel like they're not doing the best they can do for their dog. And again, that's what I love to do, is just help people feel more joy being out there with their dog and training their dog.
Absolutely. And I think you made a good point there about when you said not giving people too much information and making them feel comfortable to ask questions and be there and run their dog. Because, I mean, there's a certain amount of responsibility as a coach to hand out the information in bite-sized pieces so that people can take it in and apply it to their training. You know, you have all this information in your head about how to go from start to finish on maybe that issue or that somebody's having with their dog, or when you're teaching them how to progress, but not everybody can take that all on in one big bite, you know, and there's a certain amount of strategy, I would say, to being a coach, and not everybody can do it. It takes a special type of person to be able to be that teacher, you know, and help people understand the information so that they can apply it to their dog and progress in a way that they're comfortable with. And I think for people too, if you're at a clinic or something and they're there, you know, there's people that are there as auditors and people that are there that are going to run their dogs. And it's hard to get up in front of a bunch of people and do that, you know, when when you know that you're under the scrutiny of the people that are there, so to speak, you know, that you're under the scrutiny of the people that are there. And certainly, you know, you as well as a coach, you know, people want to do good, they want to progress, but they also want to feel comfortable standing up there doing it. So that's a super good point, that learning to be a coach and learning how to provide that information for people in a way that they understand is key in what you do. And not everybody could do that. Not everybody can be a coach. Lots of people can train dogs, but they're not a good coach. You know, I think that it takes a special type of person to do what you're doing there, especially the world they're over, you know, for sure.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And I say it's a good point because a lot of people are training in groups or they're training with a club, and there's always people there with experience that are ready to help the inexperienced people. But it's important for those experienced people to remember that, you have to be patient. There has to be room to make mistakes, as I said, and that people need to hear the information more than once. I think that's one thing that I've really figured out, is that I might have to tell you to do something differently or how to put something in practice 5 times before you actually start to figure out how to do it yourself, how to implement that practice yourself. Changing habits is hard. And what we're doing is pretty complex at times. Everything is moving really fast when you're training retrievers. Our retrievers don't move slowly. The variables are changing all the time, meaning, you know, the dog is getting to new places while it's on its way out to a retrieve and is being faced with different conditions all the time. So they're behaving differently. And we've got to read that situation and react quickly. And that's challenging, very challenging. But I think that's part of what makes retriever training a lot of fun is those types of challenges.
No question. I mean, you made a good point about how things are moving fast. And I think for most people that, you know, we're all still learning. We're all students of the game. But I think for a lot of people, there's a certain level of anxiousness there as soon as you kick your dog off the line and they go. And you have to make split-second decisions, and you don't want to make the wrong one. Do you know what I mean? So I'm sure you see plenty of times, you know, there's a factor or an obstacle along the way, a tree, a bush, a hill, something like that you're like, okay, you know that's a factor that your dog, if it gets behind that, is going to be out of sight. And plenty of times, even though people know that, they almost freeze instead of being able to make that decision before to stop, handle them away from that danger. You know, the whistle only goes when the dog's just about to go behind the danger, you know. So
yeah, I go ahead.
I was just going to say to make split-second decisions, even when you know that that's a factor before, sometimes that level of anxiousness that's there, causes people to freeze up and, geez, I know I should have done that. And I knew that was a factor, but I just, my timing was off. And I'm sure that you talk about that all the time, the timing. And just a quick note too, the other good point that you made was that you have to tell people several times. And I think as people, we learn sort of the same as our dogs in the sense that we need lots of repetition before it becomes muscle memory and we can make those decisions comfortably on the fly. So it does not surprise me that you have to do that.
Yeah, bingo. That's absolutely true. You couldn't be more right. So.
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned there was we have to deal with complex situations on the fly. So when you're going through like your basics program, things, you run into issues and it's, the foundational skills are important, but you have sort of a step-by-step plan. And I know when I first started doing this, once I got out of transition training, and you got to the advanced portion, it was just kind of like, okay, there's really no solid step-by-step program here. Now you got to just work on concepts. And I found that was sort of tough. So what I wanted to talk about mostly today was late transition training, we'll say, into young advanced dogs and advanced dogs. And certainly in our area, our water season is short. Like it's, again, like I told you before, in early June, the water in my area was below 50 degrees. Like it was a cold spring and there was warnings coming across the weather stations about, be careful around the water because it's still cold. So when you're thinking about doing your preliminary early season drills and stuff and getting your dog sort of back in shape mentally, it's hard to do some of those things because, damn, the water's cold and the dog's like, shit, this water's kind of cold to be out here slamming around doing drills for however long, So just to kick things off, what would you say would be important when you're trying to progress on water, not only on marking, but on blinds, when you have a shorter water season like that and you're trying to get your dog mentally back into shape? We'll say you're rolling into the season, your dog's physically in shape, but mentally, what would you say is important to get your dog started?
Well, I actually think the training really starts before you even get your dog in the water. You can save yourself a lot of time and headache and lack of progress just by doing some things in the springtime that instill some of the standards and skills that your dog's going to need in the water to make the water training go more smoothly. And I always encourage people to start out by reviewing some of the more fundamental drills. A yard handling drill. I have one that's called the scattered bumper drill, and it's a bit of a lining drill. So you get a chance to work on targeting, getting the dog pointed in the right direction, and it's a casting drill, and it's done in the yard, so it's a fairly small drill.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get to review handling as well. But the key here when you're doing that drill is not to focus on getting your dog to the end of the retrieve. It's to focus on the standards that you have with respect to go, stop, and come.
Right.
When you blow the whistle, that dog has to stop crisply to the whistle. That means it's got to spin around, get their butt on the ground, look at you, and wait for direction. And if you're not seeing that level of discipline to execute the stop and sit quickly, you begin to enforce that and insist on the standard, reminding the dog that it's their responsibility to meet that standard. And it's the same with go, stop, and come. And then once you get close to the end of that drill, then you begin to handle your dog around the drill with a bumper in their mouth. And you say, well, Kevin, what does that have to do with the water work? Well, if people are familiar with the swim by drill, that is something I would have you review first thing. As soon as you can get your dog back in the water, if this is an advanced, as you said, this is a late transition, early advanced dog.
Yeah.
I don't care if they're 2 years old or 6 years old. Every spring, you want to review swim by.
Hmm.
You want to review swim by to make sure that your dog, again, has solid standards with respect to go, stop, and come. These are usually the things that lead to, if they're not solid, they're the things that lead to really poor advanced learning opportunities. If the dog doesn't stop and tread water well, they're drifting out of position. They're they're they may be ending up getting into trouble for things that they don't need to get into trouble for, which is putting more pressure and stress on the dog in the water.
Mm.
And if they're related to go, stop, and come, that's just it's unfortunate. We should have taken care of that in a simpler drill beforehand, and that's why I insist on reviewing swim by. And again, it's about making sure that that dog has a really solid stall in the water, will stop, turn, look at you, and wait for direction. And then also you get into a little bit of handling work in that drill, handling the dog with a bumper in their mouth in the water, and a little bit of the process of de-cheating takes place during swim by, where you're sort of insisting on the standard that the dog needs to seek water when the line to the retrieve or the destination demands that they stay in the water. And if we did review swim by in the spring and put it into practice in a couple of other places, what we find out is then we have a dog that's pretty disciplined around the water. Discipline being the key word, meaning they make good decisions, fundamental decisions around the water.
Absolutely.
And
So
so when we
go ahead. I do.
I'll
I
let you
do.
jump in there.
Yeah. No, okay. Well, one. I didn't want to forget it, but you made a real good point right there. Like you talked a bit about discipline casting, but when you talked about doing the swim by, one of the things you said was, and that you make sure that you foster that in a couple different areas. So you're talking about generalizing the actual concept of swim by.
Yes, and maybe we should just briefly mention what swim by is. It's a situation where your dog makes a retrieve, a water retrieve, and then when the dog is about to return to you with that bumper, we may ask the dog to swim past us or to stay in the water a little bit longer on the return with the retrieve. And what we, it's done in a very drill-like format where the dog knows the different places it can be handled to in the water, so that it makes it a little bit simpler for the dog to understand that concept. And once we've taught them that concept in the drill, then we take that concept to some situations in the field where we can apply it in more real life situations. That we send the dog to a retrieve, they're on the way back, we stop them and we ask them to either get in the water again or stay in the water for a little bit longer than they might need to stay in the water. But it's part of the process of de-cheating, or teaching these dogs that seeking water rather than avoiding it will usually keep them out of trouble, so to speak.
Yeah. So when you're talking about asking them to swim by, say you did your swim by review, and we'll say that your dog is an older dog, and you've done this a bit, or any age. Okay, we'll just say that in general. You did your swim by review. You go out. You're doing, we'll say, just a tune-up drill on the water or something. Your dog's coming back with the bumper in their mouth. You stop them and you ask them to swim by before they get to you. Now, if the dog just kind of looks at you cross-eyed and says, "I'm not doing that out here. I'll do that in the swim by pond, but I'm not going to do that out here." What would be your we'll just say correction, or what would you do in that situation? Your dog's coming back, but you blow the whistle, give them an over to make them swim by, just to start to generalize that behavior, and the dog continues to swim forward after.
It starts to swim toward you. I think the first thing that you've got to do is evaluate the work with respect to the sit whistle, because oftentimes when you begin to handle your dog with a bumper in their mouth on the water, the first thing they won't do well is stop on the whistle. They just keep swimming.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then we can't do any of the advanced training that would come with the ability to handle. You can't handle a dog that won't stop in the water. So I'm evaluating the dog's work with respect to that stop first. And if they are not stopping on the whistle and treading water, then I'm going to work that problem and forget about the swim bag. And I wanted to put that out there because I think that stall is one of the most important things. If we don't have a good stall, we can't get advanced lessons in. And so if the dog did keep swimming in without stopping, I cannot make any corrections until they get to a shoreline generally.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll have to allow them to keep swimming in until they get to the shoreline. I might try coaching them a bit by talking to them and saying sit, but if they're truly ignoring that coaching, then the only option I have is to let them get to the shoreline. And the moment they get to the shoreline, then I can say sit or blow a whistle and make a correction simultaneously, and then handle them straight back out into the pond again. And once they're back several yards, then I can blow my whistle and check. Will they go into a stall? Will they push back on the water a little bit and hold their position? And generally they will, because they will have associated that correction that they got a moment ago with a place. And they won't want to go back to that place. So when they spin around in the water to look at you, not only are they looking at you, but they're looking at the place where they got corrected, and that will cause them to sort of push back on the water and say, well, I don't want to get back there because that's a hot spot.
True, yeah. So if your dog does stop and they do float and you handle them over for a swim by, they've got the bumper in their mouth, mm-hmm. They're coming back, you stop them, you want them to swim by, and they go, maybe they turn a little bit, or maybe they just sort of angle in and they're still coming in, and they don't give you what you would see in the swim by pond, like they don't give you a good over. What do you do in that situation?
Well, there's a little bit to talk about here too. I mean, first of all, you've got to sort of read the level of effort the dog's putting into it. As I said back at the beginning of this conversation, there's got to be room for error. There's got to be room to make mistakes. It's got to be a safe place to learn. And if I'm reading that the dog is trying, then I might have to, do several casts to get the dog to swim past me toward the exit. So let's just talk about what this would look like. The dog's coming back to you, you blew a whistle, they stalled, and you gave them an over and said, hey, you need to go to the left or the right and swim further adjacent to the shore. Mm-hmm. Don't get out on the shore. I want you to swim parallel to the shore and past me. And if the dog started to take that over and then started to come in toward the shore, toward me, then I might blow a whistle and then just handle them straight back. And then once they're out in the pond, I can blow my whistle and cast them again. And again, that's based on the level of effort and the level of experience the dog has. Now, if I feel that the dog is not putting an effort in, then here are the options. If I feel that correction might be warranted because I feel the dog is not putting effort into something that they do understand, and maybe actually before we even do that, maybe we should back up a little bit before we even get to correction. Let's say the dog is making effort, but they're still struggling. What are my options? Meaning they don't truly understand how far they need to go or where they need to go with that bumper that they're holding in their mouth. And oftentimes what I'll do is, after I've given the dog the over, I'll take a bumper out of my back pocket and throw it to the place where I want the dog to get out of the pond. I'm going to show and teach and try to shape some behavior in a way that's, that is a friendly and safe way to learn and is going to encourage momentum and confidence and hopefully avoid developing some lack of fear of these situations that we're putting these dogs in. So I think there's definitely got to be some teaching that goes on. And then, once we feel we've done that teaching, yet the dog is still being a little undisciplined. Now we can call it maybe they're being undisciplined. They don't want to do the additional work of staying in the water and swimming. They just want to get their feet on land. Well, now, if I think we've got to talk about a couple of situations.
Sure.
If the dog is swimming in the over direction and they continue to swim in the over direction and they look at you to question, do I have to continue to go to keep going? You could just holler over while your arm is up in the over position, or potentially you might even make a force correction. You might, again, and this is, we're talking about a dog that has been through a complete training program and understands how to react to these forms of pressure.
Right.
You can't just start here with the e-collars. I think we better make that statement. But if the dog has been through a complete training program and has a solid foundation to work from, and it understands how to react to these types of corrections, we would probably make a force correction. If the dog is questioning whether they need to keep going by looking over at you and asking you, do I need to keep going? Then there's a likelihood that we would make a force correction. That's where, and the process for that would be, we make a correction with the e-collar and we throw our arm out to the left or right and say over quite emphatically. We're trying to create some momentum. The second situation that come up is the dog had started out to take the over or not, but then they turn and come into the shoreline that you're standing on. They don't continue to carry that over. Initially, I would try to blow a whistle and then give them another over, but some dogs will just insist on coming to shore. And when they do, we're going to handle this much the same way that we did the dog that wouldn't stop on the whistle. We've got to wait until that dog gets to the shoreline, till they get their feet on the ground. Then we're going to say sit or blow a whistle and correct simultaneously, then handle them back out into the pond, then stop them when they're out in the pond and give them another over. Usually when you make this type of correction on the near shoreline, you're starting to help them understand that getting to the near shoreline is an uncomfortable place to be. Essentially, it's a hot stove. That's the way I like to paint the picture for people. And so they start to begin to look for other options about where they should go and how to apply the information you're giving them when you give them an over. And I also have to consider whether this is an appropriate time to give the dog the answer to the problem. If I've made a correction and I feel like the dog is struggling a little bit, when I give them that over, there's a strong likelihood I'm going to throw another bumper down to the end of the pond where I want the dog to swim to show them, hey, this is the place to get to. You need to get to.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that we should be teachers first. You know, when you take a dog, like you could say, well, my dog just sort of got through swim by. It's the first time they did it. You know, to put them into a real life situation that's not formalized like a swim by pond, and then just say swim over, and then correct them right away if they don't. I think that we'd be making a mistake there. Like you said, we have to be cautious about how and when we correct. But I think even if it's, you know, the situation where you're going to take and throw a bumper, I mean, you're trying to teach, but depending on the dog, there is room for correction there at times, but you have to be thoughtful. I don't think that jumping right to a correction right away is certainly the way to go. I think focusing on teaching, like you said, throwing that bumper over there, trying to teach the dog where you want them to go at the start of things is good. And then again, if they, like you said, they want to keep coming in, you let them get to the land, and then you create that sort of, like you said, hot spot on the shore. Because it's not like it's not like you haven't taught it, or, you know, when you make corrections like that, it's not like they don't know. There's just some dogs that maybe, would you agree that maybe some dogs that aren't as watery would fight you more on a discipline casting in the water?
Yeah, I mean, certainly dogs that tend to be a little less watery, that have a tendency to want to land grab, what I call land grab more. Yeah, I mean, dogs are like humans. We're all a little lazy, right? We want to do the least amount of work to get the job done in most cases. And if getting to a place if I said to you, "Hey, can you take that bumper over to that pile on the other side of the pond? Are you going to go straight through the pond, or are you walking around the pond?"
Probably
It's
going to go around.
natural for going to go around, but part of our job, especially if we're running hunt tests or field trials, if we're in competition, is to teach these dogs to take as straight a line as possible. Um, uh, and again, that keyword was teach. We
Mm.
do a lot of teaching to get these dogs to take straighter lines. But once we've taught the dog how to do certain things, if we feel the dog isn't quite meeting the standard and they're not putting effort in, we have to make sure that they understand it's their responsibility to maintain these standards. Because at a competition, we can't hold their hand and handle them every time that there's a standard they need to maintain. They have to feel the onus on themselves to maintain those standards, and that's why we will, at a certain point, enforce some of these standards with pressure. Once we feel we've taught it enough, once we feel we've done our due diligence, if the dog insists on not, seeking water when we ask them to, there may be an opportunity there for correction. But again, the key word there was there might be. We generally, the more I've found just, over time that if we show these dogs how to do things, especially when they're struggling a little bit, we'll get much better results at the end of the day than enforcing it with pressure. But I think it's a balancing act.
Yeah, no question. And I mean, that's advanced training. I find, again, when you first get into advanced training, for anybody that's, new rolling into that, I know that it would certainly seem like a major task because it's not step by step as much anymore. And there are, a lot of factors moving forward to help foster not only a good attitude, but foster a good program that tends to make sense to progress your dog and you as a handler through, So when you talk about teaching, not only for the people, but for the dogs, like when you get to the water or when you get to the field, your dog should feel a certain level of comfort that the lesson today will be taught to me, not, left on my shoulders to always, figure out and then eat pressure if I don't get a lesson right that I haven't been taught yet. So
yeah, we tend to create problems when we don't focus on teaching. When we rely on pressure. The other time we tend to create problems is when we don't recognize quickly enough that we're asking the dog to do something over their pay grade. You did make the statement a little bit ago about how we teach dogs certain things through drill work, like, for example, the swim by. We teach them how to swim by in the swim by drill. But that doesn't mean they're going to take that skill to real life situations and understand how to apply it there. There's always a transition period when we have to really sort of gently push the envelope in teaching the dogs how to generalize these skills that they've learned in drills to real life situations. The mistake that people who are relatively new make is that they believe that, hey, I've already shown this dog how to do this, and now if they're not doing it, it's because they're, quote unquote, screwing me over, or they're being lazy, and that couldn't be further from the truth.
yeah, I think that generalization isn't talked about enough in dogs and dog training. I mean, and I was going to make a comment too there that I think discipline casting a lot of times gets the short shift. I think that if people do it, like if they do the swim by properly, it's not revisited on a yearly basis, and it's certainly not generalized. But any behavior, I mean, right at a basic level, in what I do, I see it a fair amount. Like people will do a few things with their dog, just obedience-wise when they first get them, and then they bring them to me because they want to do formal obedience, and their dog doesn't perform like it does at home. They're like, wow, normally he would do this at home. Like he's usually so good and he's just sort of wild here. But we have that expectation that because we taught it in that classroom environment in the kitchen where there's no factors, or in the swim by pond in this instance where, the dog's comfortable with the setting, they kind of know the drill and they're getting towards the end of it, and then we take them someplace new. We just sort of innately have this thought in our head that, well, I've taught this in the yard, so it's got to be 100% out here in the field. Almost like going from, we'll say, your pattern blinds to your first few cold blinds. You know, I mean,
Exactly. Exactly.
nothing could be more humbling when you take a dog that's been doing well in pattern blinds and take them to a wide open field and kick them off for their first few cold blinds. You know,
Yes.
be a real brain scrambler
Yeah.
for people and the dogs at times. You know, it's pretty easy to get upset about those things. But yeah, I think that generalization, it doesn't get talked about enough. And I think that we at times probably make corrections on our dogs for things that aren't fair because we haven't, you know, focused on teaching and generalized the skill enough.
Yep.
So,
Do you want to jump back to the sort of getting our water program, what it would
absolutely.
look like in the spring?
Yes, please. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we talked about reviewing swim by, and then practicing it in some different areas to make sure that the dog understands the skill. And that really is, fundamental, meaning we're still working on making sure that that dog stops really well and will handle and stay in the water when we ask them to. And that really translates to some of the advanced training that we're doing, but we're still not done with the drill work yet. And as soon as we get done swim by, I'd suggest that people do what's called the angle exit drill. And almost every piece of training that I do focuses on one component of a retrieve or one skill that a dog needs. And each one of these drills is designed to give the dog a lot of reps in a single lesson so that they can really grasp what I'm trying to teach them. In the angle exit drill, it's really a drill that teaches the dog to get out of the water in the correct spot. Dogs like to seek land. Remember what I said a moment ago? If I told you to go and put a bumper on the other side of the pond, you would walk around the pond. And when a dog is swimming to a retrieve, if there's land en route to the retrieve that's getting closer to them, they can be tempted to get to that land and get out and then run around for the retrieve. Well, the angle exit drill is just really designed to teach a dog the standard of where to get out of the water, and that they need to swim all the way to the retrieve when the line to the retrieve demands it, rather than get out of the water early. It gives them several reps in a single lesson. And again, it's part of the process of de-cheating. The retrieves are not long. They start out really short. And again, several lessons of the angle exit drill. And the next thing you know, you've taught your dog that standard, where to get out of the pond correctly. The next step would be to do some cheating singles. And that component that we're working on there is teaching the dog to get in the pond in the right place. Again, dogs don't like to get in the water when they can do less work and run around. So we set up some situations where the dog might be tempted to avoid the water and get in it. We simply stop and handle the dog into the water and tell them that, hey, the standard is you must get into the water when the line to the retrieve demands it. And over the course of a few lessons, again, the dog will learn that, hey, I just need to get in the water when the line demands it. So now we've taken care of 3 or 4 very specific areas. Fundamentals, go, stop, come. We talked about that. Some discipline casting, and now kind of the de-cheating. Swim to the exit, get in where you're supposed to get in. And we haven't even done any advanced training yet, but I can tell you that because you've taught these skills and set these standards, when you do your advanced water work now, you're going to have a dog that's very solid and responds very well to any of the situations that you put it in the water in your advanced marking test. And also, this will also affect your blind work. And the dog will be of the mindset that they need to seek water rather than avoid it. And if you didn't do this work that I just described, and you just dove right into your advanced marking test, like you would see at a master level or at a field trial, you wouldn't get enough reps in a very drill-like environment to really get those standards down, solidly. And in fact, like I said, if your dog's not treading water very well or doesn't do discipline casting very well, you're going to end up putting more pressure on your dog unnecessarily and maybe creating some aversions to some of the training that you're doing in the water. So if you want to speed things up, start out with the fundamentals, the basics, isolate key components of water retrieves. And then when you do your advanced training, you're going to find it goes a lot more smoothly, a lot less stress for you and the dog, and a lot better learning opportunities in the advanced training.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, working on the fundamentals is key, right? So when you're talking about these drills, like how long do you think that people should do them? Like a week? Or I mean, I suppose that really
Well,
varies with the dog and how well they understand, but
it varies with each dog, and it varies with the amount of training that one person can do in a week, so to speak. But I
mm,
always do three spring training camps every season. I do a week, 2 weeks in Mississippi and one in Florida. People come for those, and they spend a week with me. And the first thing we do is we start with the scattered bumper drill. So that's going to take 2 or 3 days. And probably at the end of the second day, I'm going to start working on the stall in the swim by.
mm,
So I'm just trying to paint a timeline for people. So
sure.
by day two, I might be starting discipline casting on the scattered bumper drill, and I'm beginning to work on the stall in the water in the swim by. I'm not asking them to do the swim. I'm just working on the stall, making sure that stall is solid. So they're just going across the pond to one pile, and I'm stopping them en route to it. I'll probably finish up with a scattered bumper drill by day three, and I'll begin swim by day three. And that swim by might take 2 or 3 lessons. So now we're probably at day 4 or 5, and I'm going to jump into the angle exit drill at day 4 or 5. And that angle exit drill will probably take 2 or 3 iterations with each dog. And while I'm doing the angle exit drill, probably day 5 or 6, I'm going to start my cheating singles. So does this take a lot of time? It it depends how well organized you are with your training. I think one of the things we always have to do as trainers is set up what I call a 2 week training plan.
Mm,
How many days are we going to train over the next 2 weeks? How many lessons can we get in each day? That's going to tell me how many training opportunities I have. And I know what the recipe is, right? I know I've got to do my scattered bumper drill. I know I've got to do my swim by review and reinforce swim by. I know I have to do the angle exit drill and cheating singles. And I know about how many lessons I need to get in with each of those. Can I get those in the course of a week or 2 weeks? Maybe for the average person at home, it might take 2 weeks, depending on how often they can get to water. Maybe it takes 3. It really depends what your resources are like. And we do have to blend in some training that keeps a balance of hard versus easy in there as well. If I make everything hard around the water and the dog is constantly finding somewhere to get into trouble in the water, their attitude around the water is going to sour. So I have to blend in some really simple watermarks in there along the way. So that's going to take a little bit of time too. But I'd say the average person, if they're training, 3 or 4 days a week, if they can, it may take them 2 or 3 weeks to get sort of their spring training warm up done so that they're ready for advanced training.
yeah, right on. No, that seems about right. Because again, not everybody has access to the right water, and they may not be able to train every day. So definitely there could be some variations there. No, that makes good sense. When you're talking about cheating singles, like specifically, are you talking like different types of cheating singles, like down the shore, over points, past points?
A cheating single, the definition of a cheating single for me is it's a mark where we teach the dog how to enter the water correctly.
Okay.
And I have sort of a system of 5 different types of cheating singles that I like to go through with the dog,
Mm-hmm.
especially when they're doing their first cheating singles. I may start out with something a little bit more advanced with an older dog, but there are 5 different types of cheating singles. Short square entries, which would be entries less than 20 yards.
Okay.
And that's what we would start with a dog that's, coming out of the swim by an ankle exit drill for the first time. I'd like to be less than 20 yards to the water and put the dog in some situations where they might decide to avoid the entry into the pond, but they're still relatively straightforward and simple. After they've done those and they show they can do them proficiently, then I'm going to do what I call long square entry. So now you're backed up 50 yards or more from the water, and the line to the retrieve is perpendicular to the shoreline that they're entering on. So square entry into the pond at a place where they might be tempted to run around the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll do several of those until the dog shows that they will be they'll hold the standard themselves. They'll reliably make the decision to get into the water on their own. And then the next level would be angle entries into the pond, long angle entries. So I'm backed up from the pond again, about 50 yards, 50 meters for you Canadians out there. And we're approaching the pond, the shoreline of the pond at an angle. And because we're approaching it at an angle, there's a greater likelihood that that shoreline is going to lead the dog away from the water. And so that's the next step. And then the fourth type of cheating single, once they're ready for that, are re-entry cheaters. So the dog will get in a piece of water, swim to a piece of land, get out on that land, and then they'll be faced with a cheaty re-entry, a situation where the land will have a tendency to lead them away from the water, but the line to the retrieve will say that they need to get back in the water. And we look for, opportunities to teach them the standard there. And then the last one is called unconventional, which is hard to explain here, but essentially we're throwing the mark in a direction that can kind of, how should I describe this on the air? Basically, you're throwing the mark toward the land rather than away from the land route. It's hard to picture, I'm sure, but it's the last step in the situation of cheating singles.
So it's sort of a contrary throw.
Exactly. It's a contrary throw. I call it unconventional, but it's a contrary throw. And we do that because some judges will throw the marks in that way. And dogs that are usually pretty reliable doing cheating singles when the mark is thrown in a conventional direction might not be so reliable when you do a contrary throw.
Sure. So when you're doing these cheating singles, are you most generally using attrition? Like if the dog is going to choose to run around, you're going to stop them and try to handle them into the water without pressure?
I think again we're trying to show the dogs how to do these, and it will depend on the level of experience the dog has, the level of difficulty of the cheating single. Sometimes I may simply stop and handle. Sometimes I may stop, correct, and handle. Again, it's going to depend on where the dog is at in the process of de-cheating.
Sure.
And the level of difficulty of the cheating single, and the level of effort. If I feel the dog's putting effort in, I'm certainly just going to stop and handle. But once I feel the dog's kind of achieved a level where they should be making those disciplined decisions on their own, then we may end up using some correction to insist on the standard to reinforce the notion that they're responsible for maintaining that standard.
So
we're not going to spoon feed them all the time.
Right. When we talk about showing them, you're basically showing them how to do that retrieve. Like if you have a complex concept, we'll say in a marking test that you set up, are you more apt to, if the dog is supposed to take a piece of land, we'll say it's going to be sort of a re-entry on the way out to a mark, and the dog is going to miss that, are you more apt to stop and handle the dog and show them the way to do that, or would you reel them in? Or everybody seems to have a different aspect of that. People will, if they're going to miss it, they'll stop and correct and add pressure and maybe handle the dog or reel them all the way in to teach them, or repeat handle, show them the proper way and then repeat it. Others don't like to repeat marks. What's your theory on that sort of teaching and then possibly repeating so that the dog understands the concept?
Well, let's talk a little bit about. I like the question. Let's talk a little bit about what got us to the place where the dog is now avoiding land and swimming around it. So we have to ask ourselves, what does an undisciplined or an untrained dog typically do? Well, they typically avoid getting in the water and they try to get out of it sooner rather than later. They want to
Right.
do the least amount of work possible. And the training that we do to show them what these standards are and the pressure we use, which is the e-collar often, to insist on the standards, is what creates the watery dog, the dog that actually seeks water and stays in the water. And then sometimes they can get a little bit out of balance.
Right.
They start to avoid getting out on pieces of land because they feel it's safer to stay in the water. We have to understand that it was pressure that we applied that created that situation.
Right.
And when we do see the dog starting to swim by points or a piece of land that where the line to the retrieve goes over, a lot of times if a dog does that, I don't do anything about it. I'll let the dog swim around a piece of land if it's a marked retrieve, because now we're talking about trying to fix something that isn't broken.
Right.
If the dog is, if we wanted to create the standard of get in the water and stay in the water, we did it, and we could just end up confusing the dog when we begin, trying to handle them out of the water. And then the worst case scenario is the handler or trainer says, well, you're not taking my cast to get out of the water. Now I'm going to correct you for not taking my cast. You know what this information means. You should do this. They get into that mindset and they use pressure. Well, again, we have to remember, why is the dog staying out in the water? It's because we applied pressure to get them into the water or to teach them to stay in the water. And if we start applying a pressure now to get them out of the water, the dog is going to be potentially get the mindset that I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. I don't know what the right answer is. I'm tired of trying. It's not getting me anywhere. I give up. And we end up, creating a lack of momentum, a lack of confidence, a lack of desire to do this stuff. They look at the water and they just associate it all with pressure. And so I would never correct a dog for not getting out of the water. I think might use some attrition if I needed to, or I'd look to set up some training where I could create a new habit. I might just, get through that moment, beg the dog to do whatever I have to do, but look to create some training that would help the dog feel a little more comfortable getting out of the water, put them in situations where they had no choice but to get out of the water, and then make the reentry simpler situations.
Right. So you would just always sort of err on the side of going back to the teaching aspect of things, just simplifying the task. If you saw that, okay, I've created the dog that I want to get in the water and stay in the water. Now I need to help the dog understand that they can be comfortable getting out of the water and re-entering where they're supposed to.
That's right. Most of the training at a young age is designed to be very black and white. This is right, this is wrong. And then as we get to more advanced training, now we get into areas of gray where, well, I don't want you to get out of the water quite yet, but wait a little bit, and then I'm going to have you get out of the water, and then you're going to get out of the water, then I'm going to get you back into it. It's the same thing with some of the entries into the pond. Sometimes we want them to run by some water before they actually get in it, and that can be really uncomfortable for a dog because we have taught them that, hey, when you see water, go ahead and get in it. And in these situations, when we begin to ask the dog to do gray, what we have to understand is that that's going to take some time. Like you said at the beginning of this program, when you start out training a retriever, everything is linear, meaning you complete one step and then you move to the next, and then you complete that step and you move to the next. Not only is it done in a linear fashion, but things move along quickly. With a young dog, you can see those dogs change from minute to minute, day to day, week to week. What they know, what they learn, how they apply, what they apply. The the learning curve is very steep and very quick. And then once you get to an all age level or an advanced level, now the training, the changes in behavior can take months. It can take 6 months to teach a dog to be comfortable getting out on and off a point or doing a particular marking concept. And the mistake that we can make is overreacting to a dog that doesn't get it quick enough, doesn't pick up on what we're trying to teach it quick enough. But the learning process takes that long when we get to those all age levels. The amount of patience that's required during that development is huge.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, in all fairness, we're conditioned to our dogs learning that way, just like you said, just every day. It's very linear. You see your dog changing, every hour almost, and every day they're going through the program, they're learning, they're progressing, and then you get to the advanced or all age level, and it's kind of like being kicked out to pasture where you're like, okay, go do your thing, work on these concepts. It's going to take longer. You're going to have some patience. So having a plan 2 weeks in advance so that you know what you're going to do. So this is sort of a two-part question. How important is that, and how do you structure that for an advanced all-age dog?
I think it's extremely important. As I said a moment ago, training at a fundamental or an intermediate level is very linear, but once you get to the advanced level, now you're not just working on one thing at a time. You've got 40 things you need to work on. And if you don't have a training plan, then you're not going to be hitting everything that you need to hit when circling back to those things when you need to circle back to them, and you're going to get a little bit out of balance too. You may end up, how should I put this? You may end up working on too many hard things and not enough easy things, and then that's when you lose confidence, momentum. So that 2-week training plan, what it is essentially is a shopping list. It's not a schedule because, sometimes it's a matter of the resources we have or the conditions we have that dictate what kind of training we can do on a given day.
Sure.
But what I suggest to people is one, you need to have a very good training program, one that identifies all of the different areas you need to work on, the skills you need to work on, and the types of training that you need to do in order to accomplish that. There are advanced training programs out there like Fetch that really speaks to, hey, you need to work on these 4 marking concepts. You need to work on this in order to develop a re-entry water blind, a dog that can do re-entry water blinds. This is the process to doing it. You need to have that kind of a training program that highlights all of the different areas and gives you the process on how to do that, that also says these are the things that you might be faced with or the things that might happen while you're doing this training, and this is how you should react. So if you have that training program, what you do is you look at that, I have a flow chart for the Fetch program. You look at the flow chart and you say, well, what areas do I want to focus on over the next 2 weeks? I can't focus on all of them. I can't focus on all of them in 6 weeks. It's quite likely I can't focus on all of them in 6 weeks, but I'm going to pick, a couple of marking concepts I want to work on, a couple of standards I want to work on, some drill work that I want to do to work on the fundamental things, and then I want to make sure that I'm adding some easy stuff in there to maintain confidence and momentum. There's quite a lot of things to think about choosing from, but you want to get reps in. So if you're going to work on cheating singles, you don't just want to do one cheating single. You want to do, you'd like to do 6 of them over the course of 2 weeks to try and really drive home the standard of do not cheat when you're entering the pond. If you want to work on check down birds, that's a mark that a dog might have a tendency to overrun because something else is drawing it deep. You want to work on check down birds, you'd like to get in 3 different check down birds over the course of a couple of weeks. You want to work on crosswind blinds, you'd like to get in maybe a couple of 3-peats with crosswind blinds to teach a dog how to fight that crosswind factor and take casts into wind. but you make that shopping list based on how many lessons you can get in over the course of 2 weeks. If you're training 4 days a week and you can get 2 lessons in a day, that's 8 lessons a week. That's 16 lessons over the course of 2 weeks. So you have 16 time slots you can fill in there. Go to your flow chart and prepare your shopping list. Make sure you're getting reps in, and make sure that you've got balance in your program of hard versus easy. We need to keep momentum, confidence, and a positive attitude up in our dogs at all times as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, I think, in the way that we structure our week. Like if you say, okay, well, you're going to train 4 days a week, like probably at the end of the week, it would be good to do something easier to ease the week out if you've done some harder things at the start of the week. But having that structure, exactly like you said, and knowing what you're going to do and where you're going to do it, like it's certainly in your advanced programs, that's the way to win. I truly feel like you're spot on there. Otherwise, you can easily get out of balance and form problems that you weren't even aware of were happening, I think, or you do too much of one thing and, not enough in the other. So certainly in advanced training, like you say, balance is key, knowing what you're going to do and where you're going to do it and covering all of those concepts. So yeah, the plan is huge. Is that something that you help people with in your fetch program? Like you sit down with them and say, okay, what's your plan?
Yeah, if that's something that they want to discuss with me, I do have a lesson on how to prepare your 2 week training plan so that most of them know how to prepare it. But if they want me to review their 2 week training plan with them, I do that quite regularly as well with people that ask me to do it.
Okay.
But I think the other thing to remember, if we're talking about advanced training, is that for people out there that compete in hunt tests or field trials, but one of the things they need to understand is at an advanced level, training a dog is not done by setting up master level hunt tests or all age field trial tests. When we set up tests like that, there's usually too many things going on in that one test. There can be several factors affecting the dog's line to retrieves. There can be different concepts at play. Oftentimes there's blind mixed in with those. And so you're working on so many things in a single lesson that the dog is walking away from it without a clear understanding of what they learned that day. We don't multitask well. We don't learn well when we're given a whole bunch of things to learn at the same time. Dogs are the same way.
Right.
But if we isolate individual components of a master level test, marking test, or a blind training test and say, well, I want to work on this concept. It's going to be a poison bird. That's a mark that a dog has to not pick up while they're running a blind, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term. If I'm going to work on poison birds, well, I want to make sure that I don't have a whole bunch of other things to teach the dog at the same time. And when I'm doing that poison bird training, I'd like to get more reps in. So I'd like to do 3 blinds with a poison bird in the same lesson. Now I get to teach that dog the language that I use to pull them off of the poison bird. I get to handle them past the bird on 3 different blinds. And hopefully by the end of the lesson, the dog has a clear understanding of the language that I'm using and how to stay composed and disciplined in those conditions, as well as an understanding of the process of doing the blind retrieve in those conditions.
Right. So, and I mean, that makes perfect sense. When you think about it, I'm sure plenty of times people will go out and just set up a set of marks with a couple blinds, and it's more of a test than it is working on a concept, or maybe there's several concepts, some that might even be contrary to one another. So kind of what you're saying is staying on topic and working with a plan that makes sense over a 2-week period is key in your advanced training.
Absolutely. It isn't just off the cuff. You arrive at the training grounds and go, oh, what am I going to do today?
Right.
You really do have a plan. And again, if you want to make progress in the spring, uh, this is, again, one of the pieces or one of the ingredients in the recipe to making that kind of progress and getting ready for your competition season as quickly as possible.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And as far as just a quick overview of your structure, like, do you feel that people should be, if they have the time, we'll say, should they be doing drills and then field setups every day if they have the time? Like, I know you talked about the fundamental drills and skills being really important. Would you say that the working on the fundamental drills throughout the season as much as possible would be pretty important as much as your field setups?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's got to be part of the 2-week training plan. And I'm not talking about things like force fetch or force to a pile or double T or advanced T, as I call it. I'm not talking about those types of drills, but I'm talking about things like, for instance, most people are familiar with the term wagon wheel drill, or I have another version of it called the fan drill. And that is working on getting the dog pointed in the right direction. We're really teaching the dog the communication that we use to get them looking precisely where we need them to look and thinking the things we need them to think, but on a very refined level. That's an example of a drill that's more fundamental. Why do we want to do that on a regular basis? Because it's one of the skills that we need to have in order to be successful at these advanced competitions, at these high-level competitions. If I can't communicate with my dog to get them looking in the right direction and thinking the right things in really complex situations, we're not going to be successful. And again, if we're just thinking that by running advanced hunt test and field trial setups we'll get enough reps in, the truth is we won't. We only get maybe 1 or 2 opportunities to practice what I call targeting in an advanced training setup. But when we do a drill where we get 8, 10, or 12 reps in of the act of targeting in sort of a bit of a complex scenario, we get really good at reading where dogs are looking and what they're thinking, and our dogs get better at understanding the communication we use to get that done. So that's just an example of one more fundamental level drill that has a big impact on our success events. And if we can make sure that we're blending that kind of training into our program, our 2-week training program, we're really working toward a more successful outcome.
Yeah,
rather than just doing, we all just want to do the big sexy stuff. That's where we think we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, when in reality, we're probably not getting much bang for our buck at all.
Right. And, there's lots of drills out there that you can do, but with the people that I've talked to over the years, the wagon wheel, it's certainly my favorite, and it seems to me that a lot of retriever trainers, if they were being honest, would say that it's top 3, one of the best fundamental drills that you can do with your dog. Like, there's just so much value in doing that type of drill consistently with your dog. Would you say that in your seminars and clinics and things where people are bringing dogs to you and running them, would you say that the fundamentals are one of the biggest places where people tend to lack in skill level, like line manners, things like that, when they're coming to the line, to be able to get their dog to actually go out and do the work?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it that fundamentals are usually some of the weakest skills, and it's really leading to a high amount of failure. In all honesty, I'll give you another example: a dog that doesn't stop well on the whistle. People tend to get focused on just getting their dog to the end of the blind retrieve. They want to get rid of all the pressure that they've got on them, and the way they get rid of the pressure is just, they're blowing whistles, they're handling really quick, and they just want to get the dog to the bird.
Mm.
They're not evaluating the quality of the work and addressing substandard work. And if the dog doesn't stop well to the whistle, and I mentioned the standard before,
Mm.
when I blow a whistle, the dog's got to put the brakes on immediately. They do. They've got to spin around completely to face me. They've got to plant their butt quickly. They've got to look at me, and wait until I give them information to go. And if the dog tries to lower that standard by slipping whistles or stopping slowly or looking around after they're stopping or auto casting, which is turning to go before I put my arm up, that's a dog that's out of control. They're not looking to me for direction. They're not in a thinking state of mind or a teamwork state of mind. And if they're not in that kind of a state of mind, we can't get things done together, and we can't get them done well. And and people are wondering why they can't get through those more challenging blinds, why their dogs are so poor at them. And the one thing they needed to focus on was evaluating the quality of the work with respect to the stop and sit and enforcing the standard. And they can only do that by slowing down and really paying attention. And sometimes it's by coaching the dog too, reminding them sit, or making corrections where necessary. And once they enforce the standards for go, stop, and come, what they realize is now they have a dog that's really minding their P's and Q's, and all of a sudden their dog will handle for them really well on a blind, simply because the dog knows that they need to be a team player and they need to mind their P's and Q's. I didn't have to correct them because they didn't cast in this direction or that direction to get there. I just had to insist on black and white standards of go, stop, and come. If I tell you to stop, stop. If I tell you to go, go. If I tell you to come to me, come straight to me.
Yeah, yeah. So it's addressing, rather than focusing solely on the work and the dog picking up the bird, which eventually they're going to get. It's addressing the fundamental strength that it takes for all those skills to be able to properly do a blind or properly do a mark. Is what
It's addressing state of mind.
Yeah,
the dog's state of mind.
Right. One of the things that I see a lot more of nowadays at tests or trials is, we talk about line manners, like noise on the line, and dogs that are hard mouthed with birds, messing around, rolling them around on the ground, or not wanting to give them up, or chomping on them and stuff. Those aren't things that even these dogs that you would see so much in training. It seems to be a trial issue. Do you see any of that nowadays as far as line manners go?
If we're talking about bird handling and delivery issues first, yes, I see it all the time. But often people don't see it in the way that it's presented, or they don't recognize it. We have to understand that the dog is going out there to pick up that bird because it sees it as a food source.
Right.
That's where that instinct, that desire to retrieve comes from.
100%.
It will save their life. That's why they're so enthusiastic about it. And it is a food source, so their desire is to eat it. And what we're doing day after day is we're putting a steak in their mouth and saying, don't chew on it. That's mine. I just want you to go out there and pick it up and bring it back to me. And if I put a piece of steak in your mouth, that finely cooked ribeye, marbled just right and cooked to perfection, a medium rare for me, and somebody puts a piece of steak in my mouth day after day after day and says, just hold it, don't chew it. Eventually I'm going to try and get me a taste of it,
100%.
So we have to think about dogs in that way. Now, what dogs are chess players, and sometimes you're only playing checkers.
Right.
And
yep.
when a dog picks up the bird or gets to a bird that they're retrieving, there's probably 12 to 16 different things that can happen from the time the dog arrives with the bird or gets to the bird till the time they give it back to you that you've got to be looking for with respect to bird handling and delivery. I could name a few. Does the dog stand over the bird? Does the dog kind of mess around with the bird on the ground, kind of pushing it around with their nose rather than picking it up right away? So is there a delay to pick it up and come back? Do they stop on the return to pee, to put the bird down to adjust their hold, to shake water off? You know, you'll often see dogs get out of the water, put the bird down, and then shake water off.
Right.
Are they taking a bit of a circuitous route? These are all an attempt to delay getting the bird back to you quickly. That's how you have to view that.
Right.
Furthermore, is the dog's approaching you? Do they slow down dramatically? Do they stop? Do they run past you and parade around behind you? Do they stop and stand facing the opposite direction you're facing? Do they stay standing when they come in beside you? Again, every one of these things is a delay to give you back the bird. And if we're going to end up at a place where we've got a real problem, it will be because we didn't address all of these other behaviors. When you took the bird, did they nip at feathers? Were they slow to release the bird? Did they stand up and follow the bird? Did they jump up and grab a bird off the pile? All of these things, again, are things that we have to really watch for, pay attention to. We can't be sleeping at the wheel.
Right.
We can't be a checkers player here, because eventually, if they get away with this stuff often enough, you're leading them to believe that they can do other things to keep the bird or eat the bird.
Right.
And the way to address all of these things is very simple. This is not a force fetch issue. This is an obedience issue. If the dog is away from you, make a correction and say here. If the dog is near you, make a correction and say heel. If the dog is beside you, make a correction and say sit. So it doesn't matter what behavior you're seeing. If they stop to pee, correct and say here. If they come up beside you and don't spin around in the heel position, correct and say heel. If they're beside you and they're chewing on the bird, correct and say sit. These indirect pressure correction, what we call indirect pressure corrections, will resolve the issue that you're dealing with. And you got to be, like I said, you got to pay attention all the time if you don't want a dog that's going to be freezing on birds or attempting to eat a bird or damage a bird.
And I think what you said there is gold, because our society nowadays has forgotten, I think, that dogs are still actually dogs. And when we think about, certainly when they're puppies, I mean, lots of times you throw a young dog a pigeon or something, they don't want to bring it back to you. They want to run and eat it. And we kind of teach them to go against their nature. So when they go out and they come back and some dogs are hard on birds, like you said, it makes sense. I mean, that whole example of the steak in your mouth is exactly that. I mean, they know that we're going to feed them twice a day or once a day, whatever you feed, every day, but still they're opportunists. When they get a hold of something like that, especially it seems like if it's birds that are kind of skanky, you know, they've been picked up a lot, they're almost ready to be done using, they want to hang on to those ones more, or they're tougher on those ones. So the indirect pressure approach is probably best. Now, if you have a dog, and I'm sure that you've dealt with this, that does freeze on birds or doesn't, you know, you get a hold of the bird, they want to kind of pull their head back. Would you still use the indirect approach there? Sit and then just take the bird?
Yes. Every behavior that you're going to address is going to be with indirect pressure.
Right.
Treat it like it's an obedience issue. The dog doesn't need to be force fetched. Again, it has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
What you're trying to do is send the dog the message. You know, if it's a delay to get back to you, you're trying to send the message. You don't have time to stop and pee.
Right.
You don't have time to slow down and decide whether or not you're going to come into the heel position. You don't have time not to sit beside me or parade around behind me with the bird. You don't have time for any of that. You want to make sure that they believe that they need to get their butt back, spin around, and plant their butt at your side immediately, so they don't you're not giving them any space in their mind to think about how can I delay coming back with this bird so that I can eventually eat it or keep it for myself later.
Right. Makes sense. The indirect.
And it's the same with bird handling. If your dog is not handling the bird properly, uh, you know, saying hold is not going to fix the problem. Your dog is holding the bird. They're just not holding it the way you want them to do it. And so again, approach that with an indirect pressure correction. If they're mouthing the bird or flipping it up in the air or crunching on it, say sit and or hear or heel and make a correction. That can seem a little bit ambiguous, maybe even to the dog for just a moment, because you're using an obedience command that has nothing to do with their mouth. But what happens is the dog will see a pattern. They will say, well, I was sitting at the handler's side, and I got corrected when the handler said sit, but it couldn't have been about sit because I was sitting. So what else was I doing in that moment? And if you're consistent with that correction over time, that correction will have an impact that will see that behavior change. The dog will connect the dots and go, oh, this is happening because I'm chewing on the bird. I need to stop chewing the bird.
And I think, at a basic level, we overcomplicate things like when we're thinking about training. And I mean, behavior is behavior. We're no different than dogs in a lot of ways as far as the things we're conditioned to do. Like when we're at school and the bell rings, we know what that means. Either go to class or leave class, whatnot. When your dog sits down with the bird and it starts to have some poor bird handling skills, just in general, we'll say, I think you're absolutely spot on and right. When I do this, this is what happens. Every time I do this, I get praise. Every time I do this, I get correction. I think that's perfect, because realistically, if you sat and thought about it, you would think, oh, it's a force fetch problem. The dog doesn't know how to hold. But you're right. The dog is holding the bird. It's just not holding it properly, right? So you use indirect pressure, which we probably should have taught way back in the early stages of, depending on your program, collar conditioning or three-handed casting. I suppose some people teach it in. The dog should understand, and it should be probably a pretty big part of your advanced program, indirect pressure.
It is. We use it. We use it quite a bit now to train dogs, because we can't always say don't do X because they don't even know what X is.
Right.
So we use indirect pressure to teach a lot. It's like when somebody comes into your house and your dog's jumping up all over that person. You can't say to the dog, hey, stop jumping up on the person. They don't understand English, but you can say sit and make a correction. You're essentially saying stop doing what you're doing, and there's a consequence for doing what you're doing, and they'll associate the correction with the action of jumping, not the act of sitting.
My dogs wouldn't jump all over people.
Indirect pressure.
My dogs wouldn't jump all over people. Kevin, would yours?
If I had one, it might. But anyway,
yeah.
But I think you brought up another. And part of your question was about obedience and dogs at competitions, or maybe while they're out hunting or whatever it is. And I think that's worth a little bit of a conversation too.
Absolutely.
If you want to go there.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think what we have to realize about our retrievers these days, especially our Labrador retrievers, is that we're breeding really high-powered dogs and at the field retrievers, and we're talking about field-bred Labradors and even field-bred golden retrievers. These dogs are like Formula One race cars. They're high-powered and they're easily stimulated. When you have exciting things happening in the field, like duck calls and guns going off and birds flying through the air, and there's just so much going on to get these dogs stimulated and amped up. And if we're not doing the right things in these dogs' everyday life, we're not going to have a dog that will be obedient and compliant and composed when we go to the field. Imagine this. You go to the field for, let's say, 30 minutes 3 or 4 times a week, and you expect this dog to be a little tin soldier and do everything they're supposed to do in a split second with a high level of discipline. Yet, when you go home for the other 23 and a half hours a day, the dog gets free reign to do whatever they want with very few standards and boundaries and very little enforcement. How can we expect a dog like that to be compliant and composed for 30 minutes a day? So it's a little bit ridiculous to think that, isn't it?
It's unfair.
And especially with these dogs, it's unfair, especially with these dogs that are high powered. And the question that I get, or the problem that I face most often now with people that are calling me for help, is Kevin, my dog's noisy. Kevin, my dog's breaking. Kevin, my dog's hard on birds. Those are the most common questions. Help me with these problems, especially the noise and the obedience one. And I have a conversation with them about, well, what does home life look like? Does your dog uh, demand what they want and you comply? Meaning, when it's dinner time, they're bullying you to get their dinner ready, and then they're jumping up and down and maybe even barking or whining and making noise, and you fill up the food bowl and you put it down and they bump you out of the way so they can bust into their food bowl. Or when somebody comes to the door, do they go barking and running up to the door and you open the door and they're trying to push their way through? And or when you open up the door to take them outside, do you just let them bust through and knock you over as they want to go outside? Do they get to sit at the table and beg for food while you're having dinner? Do they sleep on the bed and jump on the furniture at will? If there are no boundaries, if there are no expectations, if there is no enforcement of standards that you need to have or should have, these Formula One race cars are going to end up in the wall in a heartbeat. You're going to step on the throttle and it's going to be over before you know it. So you do have to have these kinds of standards, have designated places for your dog to go to in the key rooms in your house, like a bed or a mat or something like that. But when you go into the living room, they just don't jump up on the couch. You can say, go to your place. No, they don't have to sit there for 6 hours, but at least you're telling them that you have some boundaries. Right now, I want you to go to that place. And dog, it's your responsible for maintaining that standard until I invite you off that place. And if you don't maintain that standard, I'm going to walk over, I'm going to pick up the lead, I'm going to snap it. Maybe you've got a pinch collar on, and I'm going to direct you back to that place. I'm not going to spoon feed you and remind you to go back there, because then it's not a standard. I'm just the guy that's going to remind you all the time. Same thing when you're eating or you're getting food ready or the doorbell rings or you open the door to let the dogs out. What kinds of standards? I don't need to tell you what kind of standards you should have. I think if everybody's listening, they know what kind of standards they should have and what they need to enforce. And if we have higher standards in a dog's everyday life, if we set boundaries, then our dogs will respect us more and understand that they need to mind their P's and Q's in this highly stimulating environment of hunting and hunt tests and training and that sort of thing. That's something really I want people to think about. I don't want them to have a dog that's not a good citizen or unpleasant to be out in the field with.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things there that you said that hit the nail right on the head is that the dog has to perform that standard. Like when I say sit, I mean sit, until I tell you otherwise, until you tell them. And I think in formal training, people are very good about that. We take our dog, we get out to the field, we sit them down on the mat, we reinforce that sit, and then we come home in the informal situation, and there's little to no boundaries for their behavior. I tell you to sit, the dog sits down, I walk away, I'm doing something in the kitchen. The dog goes, well, I'm bored, I'm going to get up, and nobody says anything. And then all of a sudden, when we're back out in the field, we have this 10 out of 10 standard, but we don't generalize sort of that boundary all the way throughout their life. And I truly feel like dogs' lives are very small. Like, we are distracted at every second of every day by our phones dinging. we're constantly stimulated with things flying at us. Whereas our dog pays pretty close attention to what we follow through on. And if we're inconsistent in that, like you say, if the standard is, well, I'm only really going to enforce this when we're out in the field, but the majority of the time, which isn't in the field, I'm not going to enforce that sort of wishy-washy boundary I have out there. Well, then the majority of the time, that's what the dog feels like they can do. If I feel like getting up after 5 or 6 seconds after you tell me to sit, and nobody normally says anything, so when there's factors involved, that's what I'm going to do, because that's kind of what I'm conditioned to do the majority of the time. So I think you're spot on there. We need to constantly be auditing what's our standard for the dog's behavior. What are our boundaries for their behavior, not only in the field but at the house. And it's exhausting in a way to keep at them like that, but it makes a much better dog. And I know myself, with the dogs that I have and have had through my life, the ones that I have now are very high octane. Like you said, they're hard drivers. They're field trial dogs, and they're no joke. And you either catch up and have a better standard, or you're going to be trailing behind them all the time, and they're going to remind you that on a daily basis that they're still dogs. And these dogs we have nowadays are very capable, hard chargers, and they need you to be a better handler and keep a higher standard. And at a basic foundational level, I mean, when people, like you said, come to you with problems like that, that's 100%. That's what you're going to point your finger to. And if people are being honest, they would say, yeah, no, I'm not very good with that at the house. He kind of rules the roost, or, I don't really have any standards for when I get him off the truck and I'm getting his collar on, and we're going to send him out to go air and then go to the line. There's not as much structure for the majority of their life. So I think that's huge, and I think something that's very much overlooked for people, that your boundaries have to be your boundaries regardless of where you are.
Yeah, I think that because of the nature of what we want to do with these dogs, if we really want to have a dog that's pleasant to work with, yes, that's important. These things are really important. But I'm not trying to be a hard ass and say that the dog can't have any fun and can't have any social time, and you can't love on your dog. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm simply stating that there's got to be structure, boundaries, and compliance and enforcement. And that, as you said, that's hard for people to do. It takes some extra effort, but we have to hold ourselves accountable for that. And if we want the type of dog that will lead us to being successful and having somebody that we can enjoy working with in the field.
Yeah, no question. I mean, in any behavior, it comes down to the standards, whether it's a human or a dog. Like your boundaries for their behavior is 100% key. And I totally agree with you that, it doesn't mean that you're going to be a hard ass with your dog all the time. I mean, let's be honest. It wasn't that long ago that dogs didn't even live inside in most people's houses. They've got a pretty,
Yes.
they've got a pretty luxurious life nowadays. When you think about it, I don't. My dogs don't have jobs. They don't bring any money into this house. They live inside with me. I feed them. I pay for them. I guess they do have a job in the fall, but it's pretty fun for them. So, and all throughout the year when we're training. But realistically, their life is pretty good now, and I mean, we give them a pretty good life. Having some boundaries is not a bad thing, especially for our dogs.
Yeah.
Was there anything else, Kevin, that you had on your mind that you wanted to cover as far as advanced goes, or with anything that we talked about here today?
Gosh, I don't know. We've covered a lot of things. I'm sure we could have several hours of conversation on different topics.
No question.
I think we gave people a pretty good taste of a few things today.
Yeah, let's call that a good start, and say that we'll have another conversation at some point, if you're willing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to do it anytime. And if you just give me a minute to give myself a little bit of a plug, if people want want to know more about
Please do.
myself and what I do, yeah, you can visit my website, theretrievercoach.com. Again, that's theretrievercoach.com. You can find out about my Fetch program that opens for enrollment a few times a year. If you're interested in a solid dog training program that comes with videos and written instruction and a lot of information to help train the handler as well, all the way from a very fundamental level like treat training to an advanced level like open all age marks for field trials and hunt tests and blinds, of course. So it's a complete training program, and you get access to me. That's one of the best parts of it, is whenever you have a question, simply a matter of reaching out to me by clicking on the Ask Kevin button to get more information. And you can also find out about the events that I have going on around the country. Both, I know we've got a couple in Canada planned, as well as a number, quite a few in the U.S. over the next couple of years. So if people are interested in coming to see me and working with me in person, they'll find out where they can do that as well on my website. So yeah, I invite them to come and check me out. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. A lot of training tips come out on Facebook just on a regular basis, weekly. So if you want to follow me there, that's a great place to do that as well.
Now, Kevin, with your Fetch program, do you have summits that you would do, we'll say, yearly just for the people that are part of that program?
We did one close to Wisconsin last year, and we brought in a trainer named Pat Nolan, who's quite well known in the retriever world. He has a young dog training program. He was a guest, and also Jennifer Broom, who is a well-known trainer in the bird dog and gun dog world, and an expert in the use of the Wonder Lead. So we had different guests there, and we spent 3 days doing a number of workshops over the course of 3 days to make people better trainers and handlers.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's really good. So yeah, I'm happy for you to put that information on there. And anybody, certainly, I just joined the Fetch program, and from what I've seen so far, it's outstanding. And I know some other people around here that are also members of the Fetch program and really like it too, just for several reasons, but certainly because it's interactive. You know, if they have a question, they can get a hold of you, which is super solid, because when people run into problems, that's where they really, truly need a lot of the help is, hey, this is what's going on. Can you help me out with it? So, well, listen, Kevin, I really, really, truly appreciate you coming on here and doing this podcast with me today. It's been wonderful. You've given people a lot of really solid information. I've learned a lot here today even. And, hopefully we can get you back on here again at some point when it works for you and cover some other topics. But for now, I just really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. And yes, let's do it again soon.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks, man.